going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromist. This is Burn Power coming to you on a pretty wonderful day in late February here in Tbilisi, Georgia. It's supposed to get up to something like 65 degrees. What is that, Los Angeles weather? I don't know. But I appreciate it. I guess I'm getting older, and as much as I'd like to be in Alaska again, I'm getting acclimatized to this warmer weather. Such is life. I've already slipped and broken my wrist once in my life, and thank you, Alaska. But as much as I love Alaska, I am here. And I think just on an economic level, I probably wouldn't be able to afford returning there right now. So here I am. Well, this is going to be a little different for me. I'm going to do a bit of an update on some of the topics that I covered in How We Got Here. So let's call this a How We Got Here update. And it's very specific. I'm not going to be dealing with any of the cultural things, music, film, etc. As much as I'm going to be discussing what I've noticed happening politically. Now, I am not a political animal. That is to say, I do not take partisan sides. I have my ideas. You know, I'm not in favor of woke ideology. In many ways, socially, I'm conservative. But then again, I'm not doctrinaire about things. And I don't have a conniption fit or a knee-jerk reaction if someone comes along and expresses something totally contrary to what I think. So what I've noticed is that there are things happening. Actually, let me put a few more cards on the table. I am a Christian. I am generally in favor of what are now called social justice issues, but not in the way they are expressed, since they seem to have left the platform of sanity in order to micromanage, feelings that people have. So, I'm also, I think that the war in Ukraine is very important, and I find that to be something that, I'm living in Tbilisi, Georgia. How far is the Soviet, that is a total, shall we call it a Marxian slip of the tongue. How far is the Russian army from where I am right now? I think about 60 kilometers, which is about, 35, 40 miles from here. Because the Russians back in the last decade or so, after the 2008 war with Russia and Georgia, they occupied the South Ossetia region. So, for me, what I've noticed a lot of people discussing in the West on YouTube, the pros and cons, none of it's abstract to me. I have friends who have come over the border from Russia to, we'll call them exiles from Russia, as opposed to refugees. And they recognize things are very weird there. So I tend to hear a lot, I tend to be able to smell, what should we say, a sort of absence of knowledge about these things when I hear, particularly my American, but also English and other people discussing what's going on with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and such. I tend to be able to smell when people don't have any idea of what's going on, except through a very narrow ideological lens. So, but we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. What I want to do here is I want to give you just some observations of what I think has been happening since the end of 2020, the beginning of 2021, particularly since January 6th. Now, this is not going to be I could do this in some manner the way I did a lot of my How We Got Here series, but frankly, I don't have the energy. I mean, I have the clips. They're all sitting. I constantly have been keeping things that I think are relevant to something, and I have different files for them. But I don't feel like going through, again, I don't feel like making this a full-fledged How We Got Here episode. And I don't think, because for one thing, the where here is right now is completely up for grabs. Everything is fluid. We do not know what many situations in the world are right now, what they're going to be like in a year, literally. And because of that, there's no point in, I felt very confident in discussing up to and including 2021. But at this point, all bets are off for me. And if you think you know everything that's going to happen, I'm really proud for you. Maybe you should make videos and explain how certain you are of what's happening. I'm not. So, but I thought what we'd do is look a little bit at what's happening on the left and on the right in terms of and the things in the middle, in terms of the culture war stuff, I'm not going to go too much in depth on political details. Like I said, I'm not a political animal. What I am, though, is I'm very interested in, one of the reasons I covered a lot of the political things related to the culture war in great detail in my 2 long videos on the teens and 2020, which to me are all part of one era, is that I wanted to basically, what had happened was politics, YouTube and such had become pop culture, had become the dominant culture, had become, people said, well, why didn't you cover more about music and movies in the teens episode? It's because it doesn't matter, quite frankly, not in terms of that story. Because the things that did matter were things like rap music, punk rock, rock and roll, the psychedelic stuff from the 60s, MTV, the grunge movement. All of that formed the mindset that now is present in one way or another, even by its absence because it was destroyed inside of the all of what happened in YouTube. But now that's all changing. And that's a bit of what I want to talk about today. So let's go to the left first. And what we find, and I think we can call this where we are now, the age of division. And one of the reasons for that is because during the teens and up through 2020, and certainly since then, there have been people who have been, what shall we say, who have been going, they've had their YouTube channels, they have their political events, people are out protesting various things, all these things have been happening. But now things have settled into a strange pattern. And yet, these channels and movements just go on and on. As Bob Dylan once said, people got a lot of forks and knives, and they got to cut something. And so what we're seeing right now is a lot of forks and knives cutting over some pretty thin propaganda gruel that just comes out every day. Some people are saying, like, this is the craziest time ever. Well, yeah, if you're watching videos all the time, it is. If you're living in reality, you're just going through a humdrum world with this vague unease of what's happening before us, which is behind us, which is in the ether. So let's look at a bit of the left. One of the things that's happened is we've seen what was called, we've seen a feminism versus the LGBT, particularly the T movement. And we've seen this in the whole debate on what is a woman. So someone like J.K. Rowling, if we were talking about her in, say, in 2016, and she's going on about, Dumbledore being gay or something like that, she would firmly be on the side of the left, wanting these new freedoms for everyone sexually and definitions and such like this. But then, I think at some point, she said to herself, well, wait a minute, if any man can simply claim to be a woman, what is a woman? To which the answer for her very clearly is, it's a woman. And one of the things that got her in so much trouble with the wokerati on the left was that she was very definite about that. So suddenly she became, for many people, an arbiter of fascism, because obviously anyone with a clear definition of human biology must be fascist. And that she certainly wasn't the only one. Now, people had been defecting from the more stringent leftish, wokish position for a while, but she was a big name. Now, does that mean she suddenly is actually extreme right-wing? By no means. I think anyone who is actually a right-wing and conservative still considers her a pretty liberal person, and not necessarily the kind of political bedfellow they'd like to stay in, include in their stew. And nevertheless, somehow she got thrown in. One of the interesting things about this, and we'll get this when we talk more about the right, is that the right has actually been much more welcoming to people of radically different viewpoints to each other than the left is. The left seems to be demanding very much sign this document. Do you agree with our catechism? And, are you following our codes? Exactly. And all the while changing the codes as they go. I think very few people in, say, 2012 who would consider themselves left-wing, pro LGBT rights, very much in favor of the up-and-coming Black Lives Matter movement, the kind of people who very much, feminists of the new stripe. Very few of those people saw the direction that some of these things were going to go. Nevertheless, as incrementally things changed, people had to just keep signing on to the new changes. And the changes, particularly in the middle of the teens of the 21st century, just kept happening with rapidity. So the LGBT movement called the people who were these essentialists, biological essentialists, we'll say, called the women TERFs. They would say, if you're a lesbian, will you sleep with a trans man? And many of the lesbians go like, no, we're still lesbians, and those aren't really women, which of course created a whole lot of problems.
Trans people are very, very scared.
Having to constantly fight to be who you are.
I've had abuse for what I do.
It's extremely frightening.
Gender has become a battleground.
A man who's telling me that he's a woman and that if I don't accept that, I'm a Nazi.
An issue so toxic, violence has erupted.
These radical feminists, they'd lost the plot.
Trans women are, by definition, male.
We know that 80% have penises.
One thing I think is also very interesting in this period is that more leftish Gen Z youngins, they're younger, they're slowly becoming adults, are questioning wokeism. Why? Because they are seeing more and more that essentially there is a program there they can't get on board with. And you see it in the rise of different channels by particularly young women.
Hi guys, it's Misha and welcome back to my channel. So today I wanted to make a video talking about why I left my old university and overall the left.
Hello my dears, welcome or welcome back to my channel. So today's deep dive topic is why are people leaving the left? So this video was actually inspired by one of you. So under my recent community post, Tom wrote, "It's weird. A lot of mainstream views these days make me feel conservative. In all actuality, I'm not. I'm just reasonable and logical." To which Mia replied, "That's the story of many. So many people have become conservative, but their views would have been considered moderately left-wing less than 10 years ago."
I think that what this means is, I think actually we are moving into more conservative times. And by conservative times, I don't mean doctrinaire conservative in any older sense. I mean that even the left-leaning people are, for instance, many on the woke left, although woke just really applies to, should really apply to the racial issues. Nevertheless, what's happening is that woke applies more and more now to the spectrum of beliefs. And we don't have any real name. Woke isn't a good name for the hydra of heads out there. And I've discussed this at other points. But essentially what's happening is that all of the different groups have their ways in which they are kind of becoming more traditional. No, traditional is the wrong word. More censorious, there's a better word, than normal. And this is especially true on the left, where the difference is that from a conservative point of view is that on the conservative point of view, there's more of an idea of sticking with the traditions of human behavior that essentially go back into time. Whereas on the woke-ish point of view is that what you find is people making up new rules about what is and isn't acceptable, and then expecting through their much louder platform of the mass media, the news media in particular, the universities, having essentially corralled academia, having corralled so much of the organs of communication of society. They are basically saying these are the new rules which you must follow, which means that if a person gives you their pronouns, you must say them, which is the strangest rule I've ever heard in my life. The idea of neo-pronouns, which after a while just become ludicrously strange. And many people have said, well, you know, if someone said, "This is who I am, would you call me this?" Which is almost like an Orwellian question right there, that somehow if I say I'm something, you have to agree with me. Do I? Why? You know, unless you don't believe in freedom and only believe that certain people have a right not to be offended. And I used to think of this when people would say, like, you know, certain kinds of rock music really offend me. To which I would say, so you mean the music that I used to hear in elevators, now it just tends to be pop music, but I used to hear this, we'd call it elevator music. Now that really offends me. But if I say that, no one's going to want to change it because they all agree we need some background filler, even though really it is offensive in a more, in a cultural way, having created this weird oral wallpaper for us. But it's similar to someone saying, "This is my identity, you must respect it." To which my response is, what's an identity? We all have identities. And I've never expected anyone to respect mine, and I am who I am. You see something about me I don't see. I see something about you you don't see. People around you see something you don't see. People from other countries see something you don't see about you. So it's really hard to say what an identity is. And if a person only believes that self-definition is all there is, they're kind of trapped. They're trapped in their solipsistic self, where the only thing that matters in the world is them. And in that case, why should I respect that? Because you're not that person is not opening up any avenue for real dialogue. They are closing it down. So I have a right to question that, as long as we still have something connected to free speech, which we do, and we mustn't forget that.
I can no longer remain in today's Democratic Party that's under the complete control of an elitist cabal of warmongers who are driven by cowardly wokeness, who divide us by racializing every issue and stoking anti-white racism.
And while I came here today to witness a movement led by young people just like me, I also came to talk about how this issue has a disproportionate effect on the people of color in our communities. We need to talk about how gun violence is often a daily occurrence for young Black and brown people in our communities and all over the world.
Okay, first of all, my outfit is just so lefty. I have this huge afro, which I like pulled back into like this afro mohawk. I've got the artsy pants on. Who did I think I was? I honestly think that I thought I was Angela Davis.
Some of y'all are not gonna like what I'm about to say, but somebody has to say it. In recent years, it's become the norm for everybody to be woke and know everything about everything, leaving no room for curiosity and no room for mistakes. If you make one mistake, say the wrong word, say the wrong thing, ask the wrong question, you're suddenly a menace to society who deserves disrespect and all the vitriol that the angry mob has to give. And to that, I say, hell no. I'm over it. We're tired of it. We want to speak freely. We want to be human. Woke culture is toxic.
Black Lives Matter, which was a huge issue in 2020, has become less and less culturally relevant as a movement. And one of the reasons for that is that when people look at, well, where did all that money go? Well, the answers aren't particularly heartwarming. You know, they're not, there's mansions that were bought with that money. There are people who profited from that money. Let alone the idea. Now, nevertheless, critical race theory continues unabated through the educational system. So there are things you can and cannot say related to race within the school system. And I'm not talking about directly offensive things, but I'm talking about, for instance, if one follows the dictates of these new ideas about race, one can't imitate anyone without being considered racist.
Chinese people bring a bill to your ass too, right? You say $48 for what? You know, and they always get smooth. You'll have 2 lots of pork or something. One imperial soup Cantonese also.
Now, Richard Pryor used to imitate, Caucasian white people. He has some great routines on that. Dave Chappelle is a genius at imitating people of different racial backgrounds and stereotypes. I think all of that is, particularly in America, that's what makes up one of the central features of American humor, is that you have so many different kinds of people who move into a country, and then, you know, you look and you see that people of a certain ethnicity, a certain background, you know, it's not even race or color or anything, because people who are, for instance, Black and American who live in an urban city in the North are very different from people in America who come from, say, a Caribbean background or an African background. So I think that what's happened is that we have, these strictures have gone on. Now, what I do notice is people are pushing back on them and are starting to say things like, wait a minute, comedy has to be free to even be offensive. I mean, much of the greatest comedy, Lenny Bruce, Richard Pryor, George Carlin, Dave Chappelle, Eddie Murphy, has thrived on being offensive. Offensive to people who needed to have their bubbles pricked and popped and opened up because they were too, and people who will often say, yeah, but you can't punch down. You can only punch up. Well, 1 million people who are all considered down, who punch up at one person is considered up, well, they can do an awful lot of damage to that one person, including take them out. But more and more, the central feature, the thing that's divided the left, has been not the L, G, and B, but the T. And Dave Chappelle has several routines describing this division. But the truth is, even people who are trans themselves have complained about this. And one of the interesting things is that I've seen more and more videos made by gay men, lesbian women, others who would be considered one of the alphabet soup of abbreviations, initials. And they're saying, during the time of 2020, I was much over here. And the more it's gone on, the more I realize, wait a minute, they're coming for me too. So, because what's happened is the T ideology, the trans ideology, ultimately is a transhumanist ideology. And everything that could be considered vaguely traditional is going to be put on the chopping block and decapitated. And we see this, some of my interactions online, occasionally I joined Twitter about a little over a year ago. And frankly, I'm wondering why. There are people I know on there, and I have, it's a way to communicate with them. But if I step into the wrong puddle, make the wrong comment in the wrong place, suddenly it's like there are wasps, hornets, who just rise up, and they'll all start just attacking you. Not that I care. I mean, it's just like, what are you going to do to me? Nothing. You can't do anything to me. You don't know where I am. You can't get to where I am, so it doesn't matter in that terms. Nevertheless, I think these people, I'm guessing, an awful lot of them are people who have no real sense of identity besides these kind of irate, unbalanced claims. And so they have to make them as loud as possible. And to immediately go for the ad hominem attack. One of the reasons I've never actually offended by these people is because I know they're simply saying what they've been trained to say over and over. But the worst of them are almost always the T, or people who identify as the Q, the queer, as opposed to the gay or the lesbians or even the bi. Because they're coming at it with this, they really have a revolutionary sense about themselves, that somehow they are, on a righteous mission. It's a crazy mission, but it's righteous because a person should be allowed to identify themselves. If you don't identify yourself, then somehow you will not exist. It's this weird idea, you keep hearing this, it's like, you're denying my right to exist, which is very strange to me. Most of the people I know who have questions about these people have never denied their right to exist. It's just in the same way that phobia generally doesn't mean phobia. Phobia means irrational fear of, where phobia now means you don't like me. You hate me. What's wrong with you? You should be eliminated. You should be taken away from the public sphere. But of course, these are old issues. This is, we've been fighting this kind of stuff for quite a while. What's getting me, though, is the irrationality of it. When one group of, shall we call them wasps, that went after me on Twitter, what I do is when I notice people starting to go after you, and especially when they start piling on you a bit, is I go back and look at the actual profile pages. They're not much of a profile. But then you start seeing things like satanic, feminist pronouns, he, she, they. You know, I mean, literally, satanic atheist. I mean, it's amazing. Demonic angel. You know, you start seeing these. Now, do I think these people are really Satanists? No. I think these people are just really, really confused. And maybe on a certain level, what they're doing can be considered demonic, if one wants to look at it that way. But they are chasing away more and more the people who would have been their allies, whatever that means, not very long ago.
Hi, my name is Marlgar Geode, and this is my first video, and I have something to say about the LGBTQ community. Like, because I feel like this is a concern that I mean, it's probably voiced out a lot, but I'm gonna add in my voice. What's been happening a lot lately in the US is something that I completely disagree with.
One thing you should know is that I've avidly been an ally to the LGBT. That's been no secret on my channel. I try to do what I can as a cishet male, you know, to do what I can do and be supportive and helpful, as I have many loved ones in the LGBT. But I am no longer an ally, and the reason why is actually because I am part of it. Yes, no, I'm not gay. I am gender fluid.
Most of you here don't know me. I'm from Addison County, Vermont. I was the person who came to Burlington 2 weeks ago to protest what Pride has become, a misogynistic, homophobic, exclusionary event. My name is Fred Sargent. I've been a lifelong gay rights advocate and activist. I joined the gay rights movement before the Stonewall riots. I was the first manager of the first lesbian gay bookshop in the world, where I worked alongside my partner, gay rights pioneer Craig Rodwell.
So there are all these divisions in the left. And I don't even want to get started on talking about what in the hell is happening with our actual leadership in America or Britain. We see, you know, it's, who is Joe Biden? It was funny last year when I was in the Czech Republic, one of the people said to me, I don't even know, I mean, do you even have a president? It was just such a forgettable figure to people around the world. They were all just glad he wasn't Trump. But, you know, we're all living with this strange sort of, I don't know, we're living in a strange bubble. And the Democratic Party seems to be, you know, they seem to be on a train without an engineer. Nobody's driving the bus. I mean, I hear on the right, I hear all these conspiracy theories, which we'll get to in a minute. But on the left, it just feels like there's no one driving the bus. You know, there's no one at the front of the train, no one who seems to know anything. And yet they supposedly have the power. I don't think anyone's in control. I don't think there's a big conspiracy behind anything. I think chaos reigns. And I'm putting my money on that. Even Antifa, who was played a huge part in things up until, early 2021, now feels like weird and I mean, even the federal government's starting to go after them. They feel like it's kind of like they're slinking back into the grass like the serpents they kind of are. You know, they're just, there was this whole thing in Atlanta where they'd taken over some sort of house or something, and I didn't even follow the story because it was just, everything just feels so ridiculous. And so the left, to me, you know, we don't even see Kamala Harris because she's just kind of a joke. You know, Joe Biden's kind of a joke. And that's unfortunate because it is at periods like this, traditionally, when the worst stuff has happened. So if you look at Louis XVI in France, he wasn't a bad king. He was just radically ineffective. you know. Same with during the Russian Revolution, Tsar Nicholas, he abdicated, and then there was kind of a loose coalition of people who, in the, I think it's the February Revolution of 2017, Kerensky and those people, they weren't bad at what they were doing. They're just tremendously ineffective. Setting the door open for someone to come along and push in and change everything, creating the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution. And even what happened in Nazi Germany. It wasn't that the Weimar Republic was bad, it was just chaotic and ineffective. Well, welcome to where we are now, and let's hope that that doesn't happen in the West. So, meanwhile, on the right, what I've been noticing is that the kind of vague contingent of the anti-woke, and we'll call them the anti-woke, because it's not really the right wing, although it's what the people who are still considering themselves the real leftist social justice warrior types are calling them it's what they call the right wing, and what they call the right wing is ridiculous. You know, so J.K. Rowling is now the right wing, which nowhere on earth would that be true. And now there was a moment, and we're still kind of there, but it's fading quickly, where there was like a coalition from, let's not go all the way to the extreme right, but from the, we'll say, traditional conservative, all the way to the center left, including the center right and various stripes in between, and now including more people who were the L and the G, including more people who would have only 10 years ago considered themselves leftists. More of these people now, there is a moment where they were kind of together on the same page. But that moment is fading. And the reason it's fading is because, they have continued questioning the woke encirclement of the culture. And to some sense have gained a sense of confidence that the people on the woke left don't have anymore.
As long as people are armed with the right facts and the right arguments, I just don't think there's any way the cultural revolutionaries can win. I don't know about you, but I'm not spending the rest of my life cringing and being told that I'm guilty of things I never did. Not doing it, not guilty.
And many people like Douglas Murray and others have suggested that essentially they've lost the cultural war, even though they occupy most of the commanding heights. That is to say, they occupy so much of the sciences, so much of education, so much of the media. But there's been a pushback. So now that even places like the New York Times are starting to question what happened with Black Lives Matter. I mean, there was just an article in the New York Times very recently suggesting that, yes, indeed, the entire COVID thing was the result of a lab leak, which, to my way of thinking, it's like, well, you missed the date by about 3 years, but yeah, you could have said this back in 2019, in December, when the people coming forward were saying, out of China, were saying it was a lab leak. But instead, we went on this whole other train of thought. And I think the end of the pandemic has essentially allowed more breathing room on one hand, but something else has happened. I think the trouble on the right started back with January 6th. The QAnon people divided the fringe right off from many of the people in the center right, center left. And those people on the fringe right, who essentially are always going with conspiracy theories. I mean, it's just like a hallmark of what they do. Everything's a psyop. Everything is something they are doing. Everything is being controlled. Everything is, a simulation. And these thoughts go further into the center as well, but not nearly to the degree that it is on the more fringier aspects of the right. Well, that created a rift right there. I remember I think it was February or March of 2021, Jordan Peterson was just coming back into public consciousness after his long illness related to a drug dependency. But Douglas Murray and Jordan Peterson were talking, and they were talking about, I think this was in February, they were talking about what had happened January 6th. And both of them, we can say Jordan Peterson's kind of center-right, Douglas Murray is a little bit more traditional conservative, but gay. And both of them were talking, and both of them were appalled by what happened on January 6th. Now, interestingly, if you read the comment section on this discussion, it was amazing how many people were like, Jordan Peterson, you stabbed us in the back. Jordan Peterson and Douglas Murray, you traitors. Jordan Peterson, you're now just being handled by, the Illuminati and all of this. It was amazing how many people were just absolutely, pissed off by their not going along with the righteousness of January 6th. Now, I'm not one of these people who says that January 6th was a Trump plot. I don't see any evidence for that. And none has really come forward. I think he did say, let's go over here, but he didn't say, let's go do what they did. That's for sure. And what did they do? It was like a field trip gone awry. It was like some people who, it's just like soon they just found themselves. Yeah, there were people there who wanted to do something, but I don't think anyone knew what they wanted to do. It was a pretty disorganized affair. Bad, yeah. But was it worse than September 11th, which is what I heard some commentators on the left say? No, not at all. It just sent a kind of a shockwave through the system. Now, we'll leave all that over there. I don't feel like talking about any of that sort of stuff. But what did happen was you have a fault line over there. And this is among the, essentially the most pro-Trumpish right. Not all of them. There were a lot of people who didn't go with that particular narrative. And the center right, center left, the people who, and essentially started to form the bulk of the anti-woke contingent. So, you had different people with different commentaries. I started noticing at this time a sense of division. For instance, one of Tim Pool's former workers kind of accused him of some things. I started noticing this. Later, just this year, Tim Pool would be having a tiff with Jeremy from The Quartering, which I found very interesting.
This is Tim Pool. He runs a beanie harem and chicken farm, and a podcast or something. This is Jeremy. He wants to be just like his man crush, Tim. This is Cassandra. She used to be an adult model turned journalist turned someone who doesn't do any research on Tim's guests. This is, well, we can't tell you her name. But she's gone by many. She claims she was groomed into becoming a groupie or video model or something, or so they say. She only spent the last 10 years dancing in music videos in her underwear. Since the time this video vixen has been advocating against human trafficking, a group of women known as the cast, because it's always a group of women who form cancel mobs, dug up some dirt on her.
Then Matt Walsh just recently...
Drama is erupting once again in the alternative media, independent media, and conservative media spaces. Jeremy Hambly of The Quartering and Matt Walsh are currently exchanging quips at each other on Twitter. And Matt Walsh has directly responded to a statement from me, one of my videos, as well as several other creators, including Jeremy Hambly. And this is an important conversation pertaining to gender ideology and how we push back on what we all agree with as being detrimental and negative.
And what you'll hear in these clips doesn't come close to representing the harshest rebukes that have been directed at me, but they do capture the basic point that all of my critics have been trying to make in one form or another with varying levels of outrage. Listen.
It wasn't that good.
Well,
he was just being mean.
Well, I was gonna say, like, what he is saying is actually genuinely, like, really mean. Parts of
yeah.
The whole thing is true. Like, it's not like it's untrue. It's not like
Dylan Mulvaney is a male, and he will always be a male. And no matter how much makeup or face feminization or whatever, you'll always be a male. This is like a reality. I have a lot of contempt for these people. Like a lot of contempt.
You're talking about like woman face people.
Yeah.
You're not talking about Matt.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Well, I sometimes have contempt for Matt, but less often than I have contempt for Dylan Mulvaney. I get where he's coming from, because like I have so much contempt for these people, and the more that this drags on, and the more that they denigrate females, the more that anybody denigrates females, the more angry I get, and the more contempt I have for people who participate in that, in whatever form that comes in. I don't know if there's a necessity or a point in just being like mean.
Here's my take on it is and I, obviously I'm much softer generally, but like there's nothing he said that isn't true, but it accomplishes nothing.
Yeah.
All it does, it's just so mean that like it won't resonate and it won't change minds.
And I will absolutely say, yeah, it's mean. Yeah, Matt Walsh is being mean. I mean, come on. Matt Walsh insults Dylan Mulvaney as eerie, weird, and bizarre. You can get the point across without saying that.
The major divide on this video is whether or not the language was a little too harsh towards Dylan. You guys know me. You watch my show. You know how I talk about these issues. I am on the side of this being too harsh, and I know there are many who will disagree with me. But to me, there is no need for vitriol.
I mean, do you reckon he's into her? It sort of does look like the sort of thing somebody would say that when they're slightly obsessed with somebody.
Yeah, exactly.
And look, factually, he's not wrong.
Yeah.
Is he?
No.
Factually.
Yeah. I don't look. If your job is to win hearts and minds, I don't think this is the best way of doing it.
What if it's your job to get clicks online?
Again, but do clicks lead to changing of opinion?
No. I don't think he's trying to change anyone's opinion.
What do you think he's trying to do then?
He's trying to make people on his side feel like he's done something cool and said something that they think, I think.
Do you think that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he's not trying to change Dylan Mulvaney's mind, is he?
Yeah, I completely agree. I just look at that and just go, even people on his own side were like, hold on a bit, mate.
Okay, so that was Tim Pool, Jeremy from the YouTube channel The Quartering, Sydney Watson, Amala Ekpanobi from PragerU, and the guys from the podcast Trigonometry. Now, one thing I want to be clear about here is that I'm not mad at any of these people. There are no hard feelings. We can disagree and all that. It's fine. I could have done without the snideness and the lame cheap shot from the Trigonometry guys at the end, especially in a video where they're supposed to be lecturing me about the value of taking the high road. Okay, when you're going to do that, you can't start the video by insulting me, but we'll leave that to the side for now. Instead, all I'd like to do is address the overarching criticism one last time. First, you'll notice the connecting thread. Okay, they all agree that I'm right, that what I said is factually correct, but they think that it goes too far by saying it out loud. Mulvaney's the one running around like some cartoon of a woman, passing out tampons in the women's room and meeting with the president to defend the mutilation of children. But I went too far. Well, see, this is where we differ.
What's going on, everyone? Jeremy here from The Quartering. And if you aren't on Twitter, like many of my YouTube viewers are, you might have missed a kind of a dust-up with Daily Wire content creator, or conservative content creator, Matt Walsh, reacting to criticism that he received from like myself, Sydney Watson, Redacted, and a few other channels.
All three of whom are different. Tim Pool and The Quartering are a bit more of the center-right people, but coming from the YouTube post-Gamergate perspective, whereas Trigonometry, Konstantin Kisin, and those guys are very different. They're definitely more center-left, and they're British. But nevertheless, because there was a whole thing with Matt Walsh that went on, the way he attacked one of the trans people, and their thought was, well, yeah, we agree with you, but why are you being such a prick about it, essentially is what they were saying. And so as a result, Matt Walsh said, well, I wasn't being a prick about it. You agree with me, so what was wrong? And because of that, there was division there. Interestingly enough, now Matt Walsh works with the Daily Wire. Jordan Peterson joined up with the Daily Wire. And then there was a whole new group of people who immediately said, Jordan Peterson sold out because he's joined up with these very definitely conservative people, whereas Jordan Peterson had been a bit more nebulous in his own kind of Jungian worldview, post-Jungian worldview in a way. But then the Daily Wire and Steven Crowder had this tiff.
When it was announced that Crowder was leaving The Blaze, immediately people started speculating that he would be going to the Daily Wire because it's one of the biggest conservative media outlets out there. Obviously, Crowder is a big name who wouldn't come cheap. It made sense to a lot of people that would be where he would go next. Right from the get-go, as soon as I saw people start speculating that, I knew that pairing, Daily Wire and Crowder, would never in a million years work, okay? Because I've worked with Crowder before. I've turned down an offer from him to work for him. I've worked with the Daily Wire before. I've turned down an offer to work with the Daily Wire. So I know how both of these, entities function. And there was no way on God's green earth that they would ever be able to reach an agreement, much less harmoniously work together. What I didn't expect, though, was just how spectacularly and publicly and quickly the whole thing would blow up.
Ben was wrong about this one time, and you were wrong about that one time. And yeah, we don't claim to not make mistakes. This actually isn't one of our mistakes. This is a great, respectable offer that we made to a good friend of ours, a mega talent, and now it's been misconstrued and is being wielded against us kind of as a cudgel. And so just wanted to be transparent with you about it.
Didn't want to have to do this, but Daily Wire outed themselves very, very quickly. And sure enough, if you see all of the people who work there, some of whom I have relationships with, they immediately tried to make this all about money.
Hey guys, so I'm not sure if you've seen, but Steven Crowder made a video about an offer he received from the Daily Wire. He criticized DW for supporting big tech on January 17th. Jeremy Boring, the CEO of DW, made a response video. And then on January 18th, Steven posted another video where he played part of a conversation with Jeremy that he had recorded on the phone without Jeremy knowing. The whole thing's crazy. Given Dad is signed with DW, I thought I'd comment a bit about the contract as I run my dad's brand and help negotiate the contract.
You see what's happening here is that these people, well, I'll get to that in a minute. But one of the interesting things that came out of the Crowder Daily Wire thing is how much money is on the table for these alternative media. You know, it's not just a few $1,000s. We're talking about, Steven Crowder mentioned a sum of $50 million. Later I heard, who was it? Maybe it was Lauren Chen, break down why it would have cost that much in the contracts they were dealing with. And part of it has to do with, these people aren't just people who may or may not be aligned, but they are also companies that feed multiple people under their respective umbrellas. Tim Pool has an organization. Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire folks have an organization. There's who is it? PragerU. There's all these different, right, let's call them anti-woke groups or podcasters or whatever. They all have their organizations behind them now because they have to put out a product regularly. And I can tell you, as someone who makes YouTube videos, regular is really tough, particularly if you have any content worth discussing. It is tough for me to stay focused on putting stuff out because there's so many other things I want to do. And I do this for very little in terms of any financial reward. Not enough to, it's like I'm sitting here going like, okay, I make a few $100s extra a month, which is keeping me alive, but is it worth that? But then I think, if I don't do that, you see. But even on my teeny microscopic level, there is still, it's still a little bit of this figures in. I have to keep doing it. And I am sure the pressure is much, much greater when you've got, followings over 100,000, over 1 million, over 10 million. When you've got these kind of numbers you're dealing with, everything starts to change. So, seeing how much money is on the table here, that was kind of a revelation for me, and saying, okay, well, this is really, really interesting. These were just people who were making their voices heard. Joe Rogan now, who has very definitely moved into the camp of the anti-woke. He used to be more non-committal, but things have gotten so crazy that he's had to essentially put his flag down on the side of the anti-woke. He's very much, interestingly enough, with Joe Rogan, you see another thing. He's very much pro-psychedelics, pro-getting high, this kind of thing. There is a lot of the people who were pro-legalization of cannabis, marijuana, hemp, whatever you want to call it, have kind of drifted into this libertarian zone that's in the center here. Not all of them. There are many libertarians who are still more on the woke front or just trying to ignore the whole thing. But interestingly enough, this pro versus con psychedelics event, the psychedelicists have really been pressuring Jordan Peterson to the degree that he finally had to take some to kind of calm them down, because the pro-psychedelic arguments is how can you comment on it if you haven't taken it? To which my response is, well, just watch the people, listen to them, let what they say. I mean, you don't have to take heroin to be against taking narcotics. You don't have to try a thing to have an opinion about a thing. If that was the case, well, you just think of all the things you'd have to try to have any opinion on it. I don't even want to begin to list those things. But then Jordan Peterson does do that, and now he's got other people who are going, who the hell is Jordan Peterson now? And I think this is really fascinating. What you're seeing is, if we just take the anti-woke as a pie, suddenly it's being divided up in hundreds of different ways. But I think part of this has to do with the fact that, and this is crucial, part of this has to do with the fact that the anti-woke now contain many of the forces who were antagonistic to each other during the 90s. Do you understand what I'm saying? If you went back to the 90s right now, if I was to take you right now, 1995, throw you down. In 1995, gay versus Christian. The what should we call them? Alternative grungy folks would be one way, but then there'd be these more like rave kind of techno people on another side. All these things. Camille Paglia was talking against political correctness back in the 1990s. And yet she was very much in favor of other kinds of freedoms, particularly in the sexual realm. So this is but what's happened is these people who were kind of like fighting each other in the 90s are now increasingly all on the same side. So the people who were pro-psychedelics in the mid to late 90s are now finding themselves bedfellows with various kinds of Christians. And you can see also these divisions within the Christian sphere of the anti-woke. More and more I see there's what some people kind of jokingly call the ortho bros, the kind of, I don't know how big a revival of orthodoxy, but certainly the presence of Eastern Orthodoxy, the Christian theological statement of faith, are more and more having a voice inside of the American culture. And I think this is really fascinating. People like Jonathan Pageau, various sorts of, there is an American Orthodox Church now, and they're gaining in adherents. Is it that big yet? I don't know. I haven't seen any statistics. It certainly isn't coming anywhere near to the size of the Catholics or even, some of the larger Protestant denominations. Nevertheless, these folks tend to be very, what should I say, pro-Orthodox. That would be the kindest way to say it. Real sticklers on the other way. And so they will come at the more Protestant or Catholic Christians in a very direct sort of way, which I find really fascinating, and at the same time I find there's a troubling aspect here, and the troubling aspect is that hey, we're all on the same side when it comes to this larger sphere. And if we lose that because of the inherent divisions within all these, see, what happens is, let's say the major woke contingent were to suddenly, it won't, but suddenly just disappear tomorrow or lose their power, which could happen. Then we're stuck back in the 90s, or a variation thereon, where all these people are fighting each other again. And I don't want to see that. And it's not that I don't agree with many different aspects of this, but I think there was an idea a couple of years ago. We used phrases like the IDW, the intellectual dark web, which was never taken very seriously. But then again, you have people these days who don't take any labels seriously, because these labels don't really give you a sense. There's a lot. But interestingly enough, the Orthodox are very much label-oriented, and that label is we're Orthodox, period. And whereas many Protestant denominations are trying to be more accepting of conditions changing and such. Really bizarre. But again, I'm not plumping down on any sides here. There's plenty good reasons to reject Protestants and what has happened. But I think many of those is because they're always behind the times. They have no idea what's going on. They'd rather start a megachurch than understand the world they live in. Or at least that's how it was. Things are changing now. Now there are new divisions within Christianity of, is your church a woke church or not? And then comes the Russian-Ukrainian war. And I think, with all these, like you have on the side of, this is something that affects everyone because it's coming from outside of our normal culture war stuff. And nevertheless, there are a lot of divisions now caused as a result of that. And I remember that Konstantin Kisin, who was born in the Soviet Union, Russia, was very much taking the side of, this is a bad war and we need to support the Ukrainians. But then suddenly there are a whole group of people on the other side, including the people over at the Lotus Eaters, who is Carl Benjamin Sargonovicad's group, and many other people, Tulsi Gabbard, who are on this new coalition of the anti-woke, who suddenly were, it's like they all watched a John Mearsheimer video and suddenly were anti any involvement of the U.S. in Ukraine. And they're all using the phrase proxy war, to which, from my position here, I doubt anyone in Ukraine thinks this is a proxy war. It's not America fighting. They're saying, we need more help. But, and granted, there are a lot of issues here. This is quite complicated. I've been listening to, I think Konstantin Kisin is someone I've spent more time listening to. There's another guy named Vlad Vexler.
I heard Mearsheimer say that NATO expansion is the cause and the explanation of the Ukraine crisis. At least substantially so. There is then always a question, how far is Mearsheimer then saying that NATO expansion isn't just the cause, but also is the justification of Russia's aggression? And that's always a difficult conversation because of the kind of position Mearsheimer takes in international relations. And I'm a political philosopher. I'm not really even a political theorist. I'm a political philosopher. I'm not an IR theorist or an IR scholar. But nevertheless, with the kind of position Mearsheimer takes, the gap between A has caused B and A justifies B for him is not very big.
Who has, I don't agree with him on some kinds of politics, which reminds me, then there was the whole abortion ruling from the Supreme Court, which also affected these divisions. But interestingly enough, on the left, you have the woke people don't want to be involved that much in the Ukrainian war. And on the right, we'll say the center right to fringe right don't want to be involved. And it's just complicated. I mean, I have friends here of different stripes, including, like I say, I know Russians here who have escaped. I have an American friend here who is absolutely of the whole war is ridiculous from a kind of a rightish perspective. I have friends here who are Georgians who just say, we're next. Once this is over, they're going to come those 50 kilometers to us. And I have my own thoughts, but I'm not giving them here because that's not what's important.
I don't apologize or criticize or any of that, those of us who've pushed back against this. And yes, you're right, a positive vision is needed so that we can say to people, well, this is where you should put your energies. But there's also another reason, which is that the process of pointing the finger at the woke and saying you are becoming deranged makes you deranged. And you can see that very clearly as you look around at anti-woke people now. I say this often now, you'll be familiar with the online meme of, I support the current thing, which is what all the non-mainstream people use to sort of make fun of the mainstream people who jump from cause to cause to cause, the flavor of the month, whatever. But I see very clearly now that there is the exact and opposite reaction happening, where a portion of the anti-woke or the right or whatever you want to call them have become, I oppose the current thing. And it is enough for them that the mainstream media or the corporate media or whatever are saying something to believe the exact opposite without doing any research or any critical thinking applied whatsoever. And we should be very concerned about that, in my opinion, as much as we've been concerned about the woke stuff. So the positive vision is needed not only to inspire these young woke people to build and make things of themselves, it's also needed so that we do not become the abyss that we've been staring into. And I think that is already happening.
What's important is that we all have to learn to live together. I haven't even mentioned climate change or other wars around the world or, what's happening in France or Poland, Hungary. Everyone thinks they have a handle on this thing. But like I say, I have no truck with conspiracy theories. And everyone says, well, you must now. Look at what's happened with the virus and the vaccine, and everyone gets like, ooh. And I sit there going like, yeah, what happens with that stuff looks pretty much like chaos and people trying to manage it and doing extremely stupid things and fear. And it doesn't look like a conspiracy theory, though I think if we have a worse virus come down the pike, one that's a little closer to a real bubonic plague or Ebola or something, it is quite clear to me there will be massive, serious authoritarianism as a result. I mean, when I look at what's happened in Canada or when I mean, they just went on and on and on with this. The whole thing with the truckers, I just found that appalling how they treated the Canadian truckers in Canada, and the Canadians are just have become weirdly, from being like one of the friendliest countries in the world to being one of the most Orwellian, so that they now have the maid law, which allows one to choose or to be chosen for. If life gets difficult, we'll help you relieve it by helping you leave it. Laws. So, yeah, we're on, like I said, we're on the edge of some very dark things. What we need is less fear, less conspiracy, a little bit more humor, a little bit more desire to consider people who are different from us, including people who are practically share the same beliefs, but just don't share them in the same way, to be considered more human. And what I see happening is fragmentation. Whereas what we need to do, we need to find a way to restore culture, to find our connections to our historical roots, whatever they may be. And to do so in ways that are not authoritarian, to do so in ways that allow for freedom, to do so in ways that we're not slavishly imitating the past, but also questioning the results of, say, what happened in the 20th century. So, I don't know what this was all about. I just have noticed a lot of division, and it's tiring, it's exhausting. I'm paying a lot less attention on YouTube and other alternative sources because, like I said earlier, like when Bob Dylan said, people have a lot of forks and knives and they got to cut something. Many of the new alternative to the mainstream media sources of news, discussion, information that have arisen, these sources that now have more and more financial power behind them, are unfortunately having way too many fractures amongst themselves. They are also falling prey to commercial temptations and propagandistic temptations, none of which I am appreciative of. And they are not looking at the things which are deeper, more meaningful. And I think there is a story. I'll tell this. I heard this from a black preacher once, and he told this as part of his sermon. And he says, there were a couple of guys who went out to play golf. And they were out there slicing and putting away. And one of the golf balls goes and lands on top of an anthill. And so they go over there, and the man whose job it is to hit the ball gets on there and swings, takes out like 10,000 ants, but the ball is still there. And then he comes along and swings again, another 10,000 ants disappear, die, are concussed. And finally, this goes on a couple more times, and finally a couple of old soldier ants look at each other and go like, you know, if we want to survive this one, we better get on the ball. And that is, if we want to, there will be a major transhumanist wave coming down the line. We can see some of the insanity that is done in the name of climate change being a prelude to this. People who think that the environment, which living in the digital realm they have almost no connection to, is more important than humanity, which living in the digital realm they also have very little connection to. And we will see more things. We will see things related to technology, the insertion of technology into our bodies, the cyborgization of humanity. The word robosexual has been coined. We will see more and more of these things coming down the road. We may be in a place right now where these things lull because of the absurdity of what's going on. For instance, some of the absurdity of the trans movement is now so absurd that it is showing its cards as being a bankrupt ideology. But it's not spent by any means. And I think we are best if we look for a way to restore our humanity, to restore the meaning of culture, to find a way to just get beyond this. Because if we don't, that next wave, and there will be a next wave, and it'll make this wave of cultural insanity look beautifully. You know, people will look back. You remember when things were really great back in the 2020s? It's coming, and you need to be ready. And the best way to be ready is to treat other people as human beings, and also get interested in stuff that isn't day-to-day stuff. Read serious literature again. Learn about gardening. Don't look at nature as simply being a place for recreation. Look at it as being a place to understand. I don't care what you think about climate change, but let's not live like swine. In fact, that's doing the pigs a disservice, because pigs, the only reason they create a lot of problems is usually because of us, the way we treat them and pen them. So let's look for a way to bring something of a restoration of humanity. Can it be done? I don't know. But if you give up, if you take the black pill, a word I hate, much as I hate all the names of those pills, but if you decide it's hopeless, if you decide they are controlling everything, you've given up the game, and what you have to say isn't particularly of that much importance. You have to find a way to restore humanity, to strengthen the things that remain. We can't get the good things from the past that have disappeared back, but we can find a way to learn from them. And there are good things now that we need to retain. But living in a propaganda-soaked social media environment is not one of them. And that's all I have to say. If you want to subscribe, like, support the channel, you can do that. Link down below for supporting the channel. This is Bern in Tbilisi. The day is good. I had a great walk this morning. Fed some dogs some bones. Worked on some ideas. And here we are. We will meet again. Throw a beat.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.
Save it. Help me save it.